Okay, welcome to part 2 of the home front, or technically lesson 5 on our World War II unit. In the last session we looked at the end of the Battle of Britain, but the start of the Blitz, and we also looked at total war and how every part of society is involved in war. And then you created your own propaganda posters. Now in today's session, we're actually going to start looking at a specific part of the home front story, and that's the evacuees. Now you might have heard about the evacuees before, you might have seen pictures of the children with the little labels on, as if they're some kind of lost Amazon package. So today we're going to look at a little bit more in detail at the evacuees story. Now before the war, the British government planned to evacuate all the children, people with disabilities and pregnant women from the cities. This was called Operation Pied Piper, like the tale of the Pied Piper who played his whistle and led all the rats out of town and led all the children out of town. In 1939, before a single bomb was dropped on Britain, 1.5 million children were moved away from their families out of the cities and evacuated into the safety of the countryside. Once there, they were billeted, sent to live with distant relatives and host families, who volunteered to look after the children until the end of the war. Now you might actually have relatives that were evacuees. You might have grandparents or great uncles or great aunts that were actually evacuated themselves as children during the war. If they were, ask them if they have any amazing stories, or ask them what it was like. You might learn a lot from them. In the first 4 days of September 1939, nearly 3 million people were evacuated from Britain's towns and cities and moved to safer places in the countryside. The vast majority of these were school children, accompanied by 100,000 teachers. The children were not told they were being evacuated. They were given a little case, they were given a change of clothes, and their parents were told, don't tell them, make it a happy occasion. At the stations and on the trains, it was made to feel like a party, with bunting, cake, and even party hats given out to make it feel like a fun adventure. This is why in many of the pictures of evacuee children at stations and on trains, they look quite happy. It was all part of Operation Pied Piper, to make it feel like it was an adventure and not something scary. Let's have a look at a short newsreel from the time.
For the second time in this war, and to another 120,000 of them, comes the great adventure. So it's goodbye to the cities and danger areas. Labelled and loaded and not forgetting their gas masks, the children head for the special trains. And they're not worrying, they're off on a holiday. These mass movements of our children are the greatest tribute in the world to the British way of life. Even in the midst of the storm and stress of battle, in the midst of the greatest war effort this country has ever known, we don't forget the safety of our children, on whom the future of our race depends. Humanity still plays a part in our life, even though some other nations may have forgotten what humanity is.
The children were taken to towns and villages across the countryside. They would use the labels attached to the children to help work out where they needed to go. Some of the host families would be distant relatives of the children, whilst others would have been volunteers who offered to look after children throughout the war. Many of the children lived with their host families until the end of the war in 1945. That meant they were away from their home for 6 years. Now what do you think it would have been like to be an evacuee child? Just take a moment to draw a picture of evacuee and do a few thought bubbles around them, thinking about what they might have been thinking about. Would they have been scared? Would they have been happy? Would they have been thinking of an adventure? Write down a few thoughts now. I wonder what you came up with. Okay, so now we're going to go on to our big task. So for this lesson's task, we're actually going to do 2 parts to it. You're going to do some independent research and then you're going to do some writing based upon your independent research. Now the research you use is all going to be from the BBC School Radio website. Now, using the BBC School Radio website, you're going to conduct your own research into what life was like as an evacuee child in World War II. Listen to the interviews from the real people and make notes on where the evacuees were being taken to, where had they come from, how was life different for them in the countryside compared to the city, what do they miss, who were they billeted with, do they like them, do they not like them, did they have any interesting stories. Now the recordings you'll hear will be from real people at the time. This is called primary or first-hand evidence. It's not reported and told to you afterwards, it is them saying it to you. Go to the link on the BBC Schools Radio website and you'll be able to use all of the clips on the website. Now, the BBC Schools Radio website is absolutely rammed full of interesting content. There's a whole page for World War II evacuees with videos and transcripts that you can actually use to find information. There's also things from the Blitz and World War II sounds, and in fact, you can even find things such as speeches and songs and news articles. Use the website to conduct some really thought out research for your project. Now, what kind of notes and research you decide is important is up to you. But the piece of work we're aiming towards making in the end is an evacuee's diary. So when you're making notes, I want you to try a few of these things today. So it's very easy to sit there and listen to notes, but we need to try and make sure that we're actually internalising what's being said. We need to think logically about what we can hear. So I've put together this short visual note-taking guide. Number 1, be alert. Listen to what's being said. Listen out for important details and emotional details. Do they like it? Do they hate it? What does it feel like? What's the air like? Is it hot? Is it cold? Is it dirty? Is it clean? Is it the first time they've seen a cow? Remember, they're from the cities. Don't write everything down. Yes, they might be saying quite a lot in the radio interviews, but it doesn't mean you need to write it all down. Just write down what you think is important. Then make lists of what you hear. It's a really good way of noting down key and important information in a concise way. Finally, doodle. Use arrows and bubbles to emphasise key parts. If you hear something you think, wow, this is really important, draw a little bubble around it. Or if you find there's a connection to something else, draw an arrow. Make the arrow look interesting to kind of catch your interest, to make you engage through your notes. Now, these notes are just for you. However, try and make the writing clear. Although no one is going to be checking it for you, you are going to be checking it for yourself. And if you come back to looking at your notes later to find that you can't read your own writing, it's a bit useless. So make sure your writing is clear. Okay, once you've conducted enough research into what life was like for an evacuee using the BBC website, you're then going to start your evacuee writing task. Now, using your research, you're now tasked with creating a piece of independent writing all about an evacuee's life during World War II. For this, I want you to create an evacuee's diary. Now, in the diary, I want you to include a few key points. Number 1, the evacuation from their home city, London, Manchester, Birmingham, wherever you think is important. Number 2, the arrival in the countryside, what do they think of it? Remember, these children have possibly lived in the city their entire lives. It's the first time they might have been in the countryside. Number 3, the billeting with their host family, what do they think of them? Number 4, their role in the war. Are they given a job? What is it? Some evacuee children were given jobs to go and look for scrap metal. Some were given jobs to dig fields. Some were given jobs just to help clean the house. Some children were actually sent to the local village school and were allowed to be children for the rest of the war. Finally, I want you to include an element about them returning home. It could just be at a point during the war, but I want them to go from the countryside and I want them to note down how it has changed. Remember, these children were evacuated before a single bomb was dropped. If they return in 1941, much of London would have been bombed. It would look different. This is going to create some very interesting writing. Now, use your own research to make the diary as authentic as possible. It can be based on a real person or one you make up. What happens to the character is up to you. Now, you can be as creative in how you present this diary as you'd like. You can write it simply on Word or pages, or you could even make an actual diary and even tea stain the pages afterwards. Or you could actually make it completely digital using a website like Canva or Pic Collage, whatever you'd like to do. Now, if you are still stuck and you don't know where to start with this, I have attached a short planning sheet just to help you get going. Right, I look forward to seeing what you come up with, and I'll see you in the next lesson.